Okay, Andrew, this is the model I was telling you about, the visual representation of what I'd like to go through. Um, you'll notice that there is a conceptual component and a practical component, and while this looks quite small, this is in fact where we spend most of our time. But it is really important to get this nailed so that we can talk about it down here. So I'll go through this process now just to demonstrate the nature of the model, and you can tell me if it's something that you think is suitable for developing further. I first talk about content and the way in which we know that our work programs are organised by content, how our textbooks are structured by content, how our assessment is driven by content, and how often it's associated with the concept of rigour, as in the more content, the more rigorous, and we want to challenge that by associating rigour with some more high-level skills. So by content, we generally mean things like facts and propositions. There's also some procedural stuff, but facts and propositions from all subjects, F equals MA, use Peel for paragraph structure. These are all things to know. So these are authorised propositions, if you like, that we send into the classroom. And it results in what I was calling teaching by echolocation. You send out these strings of propositions and wait to hear them back, and that tells you that you've got some positive results from students. But we know it's, of course, far more than that, in this old idea that the education of the future is about more effective ways of just processing content. We give it to our students in more sophisticated ways is something to be challenged. So I talk now about what you do with knowledge, and that's the cognitive skills, the things that you do with knowledge. These are the things that are identified in descriptors, be they IB descriptors or QCAA descriptors. The IB command terms of analyse, compare, deduce, etc., are all cognitive skills there. And we see here the middle year program critical thinking skills listed here, and almost all of these are in effect cognitive skills. And the same thing is true, of course, of the QCAA syllabuses. We have these words: evaluate, analyse, explain, etc. But these are all categorically similar things. And I want to make an analogy here. There's an old story that nothing in biology makes sense except in the light of evolution. Without evolution, everything is just a kaleidoscope of shape and colour and function. But with evolution, with our understanding of how all the animals work together, and all organisms work together, we have a very integrated and very powerful explanatory mechanism which allows us to be very productive with our hypothesis formulation and testing. In the same way, I think we need to understand that things like these words that we talked about here, are in fact cognitive skills. They're a category of things. It's a bit like sending people out into the field to explore animals without telling them about mammals, or birds, or reptiles, and how they relate to each other first. I mean, this is fundamentally important information. The same thing is true in education. We need to know that there are categories of things. One of those things is cognitive skills. If we can recognise something as a cognitive skill, it means that we can then use it in a certain way. But of course, how well are we doing the cognitive skills? That's a question worth asking, and this is where we come into this concept of the values of inquiry, ways in which we can evaluate our cognitive skill operations, provide feedback on the skills. These values are applied discerningly, that they're at the core of professional practice. To just look at some of those things there. The values of clarity, precision, accuracy, relevance, coherence, cogency, the standards by which we judge the quality of our thinking, what we do with knowledge. And if we go back to our middle year program ones, we see that they're also associated here. Things considering ideas from multiple perspectives, for example. That's the value of breadth. Highly linked into the cognitive skills. what a practice in the values leads to is a range of virtues which come from mastery of these values. These things are characteristic of effective thinkers. These are the sorts of things that, when you look at someone who's a paradigmatic critical thinker, they have these particular characteristics. I'll make the point too that it's people who have these virtues that we'll talk about down here that create the knowledge of the future. These people create knowledge producers, or the virtues create knowledge producers. So it's not just about learning knowledge, it's about how to produce it. Sometimes these things are called effective dispositions, things like resilience, open-mindedness, integrity, curiosity, etc., etc. The IB learner profile is entirely populated by virtues. Most of them intellectual, you might argue about caring, etc., but they're all intellectual virtues that come from the result of education and the values. This again makes us knowledge producers. Now, all of this has to occur in an atmosphere of inquiry, inquiry has a bad rap because people use it or have used it very loosely in the past without a very good understanding of what it means. It's certainly central to the IB ethos and documentation, but it is the process, as I'm defining it here, through which the cognitive skills are developed and in which feedback is provided. It achieves metacognition through a discussion and the feedback using the language of the cognitive skills, and it gives you the tools of evaluation through discussing the cognitive skills using the language of the values of inquiry. And these two things, metacognition and tools of evaluating your thinking, are the two things that I'm suggesting are necessary conditions to be called critical thinking. Then to go down to the practical components here, all of that leads us to three pedagogical imperatives. These are principles of actions. These are not algorithms to follow, they are principles of actions to be applied by professionals. The first was to shift the focus from knowledge to inquiry, and the reason for that was to allow opportunities to develop the cognitive skills. So we look for opportunities in our content-driven syllabuses to focus more on inquiry skills with the explicit goal of developing particular cognitive skills, which we name. That we think and plan in the language of student cognition to facilitate metacognition, to be sure, and to provide a language of feedback for how students are going in their work, which means in their thinking. And then we have this idea of working collaboratively when thinking can be shared, because we know it's when thinking can be shared, and by thinking I mean justifications and warrants for belief and the analysis and evaluations of others' arguments. We know that can give huge cognitive gains to individual students. And it is in that collaborative environment where students learn the norms of critical thinking, how the values, in fact, are best applied, what works and what doesn't, and why. And that's basically our package. So we can work this up to suit, but I quite like the simplicity of this too, because of course simplicity is one of the values of all of this. So whatever we've said here about values of inquiry must also apply to what we're doing here. Okay.